As we continue on, just emphasizing for this year the emphasis of Christ-like formation and the focus of unity, holiness, and benevolence, is the reason we're doing that is that we stay focused on what we used to call, and a good word, discipleship. The problem with the word discipleship is like the word gospel, is it has been watered down, used for many other things, and we kind of lose the quality of the word discipleship. Ray Charles once said that Joe Cocker was his one true disciple. Now that might mean something to some of you or other that know those two musicians, and if you know anything about the music of the two, they reflect one another. And we've used it that way, and just like we've used the word gospel. And that is why I'm emphasizing Christ-like formation, that God would form in us his image, which is his son Jesus, in and through us for others. Capital O for the other, God, in worship, in others, in community. That we would worship together, that we would serve together, that we would love one another and family as a household of God. But that all comes from our Christ-like formation. That is the goal. If we are not, as the word says, iron sharpens iron, if we are not helping one another to be more Christ-like, then what are we doing? We are doing the opposite. We are helping one another become more un-Christ-like, because there's no neutrality here. And then through these three areas of unity, as not only as we come together in communion, in worship and serving, but that the goal is unity. That Christ, Lord of Lords, King of Kings, that his kingdom would be established. One rule, one Lord, one people. So unity is way beyond that. Holiness. Well, holiness is something we don't talk a lot about because so many of us have these odd images of what it means to be holy. Oh, he's just a buzzkill. He's a party pooper. Who wants to be around that sourpuss? That's what we think of someone who's holy. Well, I have never gotten that idea reading the Gospels that Jesus was anything like that. And my understanding is he was the most holy person ever. Matter of fact, he was accused of partying too much. And then on the other side, he was like Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. In other words, holiness is far more than what we think these perceived ideas are. It is living a life set apart for God. And then we talk about benevolence, that outward looking generosity that God works through us. That's why we're focusing on these things, because this is what matters. And I will continue to challenge all of you to look at not only your life, but the life of Prince Street Church and how all of that comes together and then explodes out of our lives and out of this church into the community. Well, as we continue on with this Jesus, Son of David, our series in Matthew, is we're looking at really how God is becoming king through his Son as he establishes David's throne. As he establishes his rule, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The prayer that Jesus taught us. So as we continue through this, this is really my second part of this idea of spiritual warfare. Last week, we talked about the spiritual warfare of the attack that we experience from without. And it was that storm that even seasoned fishermen feared because they knew this was no ordinary storm. It was an attack. And then we come to this passage and we start to see why the enemy was attacking Jesus and the disciples. Because they did not want them to end up in this place. And let me read this passage. And when he came to the other side, meaning the other side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee, going through that horrific storm where Jesus rebuked it, and when they came to the other side, to the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men came from the tombs, and they met him. And they were extremely violent, so that no one was able to pass by that way. I have no idea how long they had been there, but long enough to where no one went that direction, because it was dangerous. So why in the world would Jesus stop there? Why would he do that? And when they saw him, they cried out, "Son of God, leave us alone. Have you come here to torment us before the time?" I love how Matthew puts the gospel together. The disciples, as we left them with their mouths hanging wide open, "What sort of man is this?" And then who in the world answers that question? The demons. They knew what sort of man this was, the Son of God. We get the glimpse on what that means to be the Son of God if you go back to the baptism of Jesus. When John the Baptist anointed him to his kingship, and then we hear the voice, "This is my Son, whom I take delight in, listen to him." Quoting from the Psalms. In other words, this is my Son, the King, the Anointed One. See, the demons knew that, and they knew Jesus' authority. Have you come here to torment us before our time? I can only imagine what the disciples are, again, just when they put their mouths back in order, it was like again, as they stand there. And then, as they cried out before our time, in verse 30, says, a large herd of pigs was feeding some distance from them. Then the demons begged him, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." It's a strange story. And he said, "Go," because he was a man of authority. Remember, the centurion knew that. He said, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep slope into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen ran off. What a great understatement. The herdsmen ran off, went into town, and told everybody what had happened to the demon-possessed men, and obviously what happened to the pigs. "You know, you hired me to herd these pigs. I'm sorry, they're gone." "What do you mean they're gone?" "Well, we can make, deviled pig." But the herdsmen ran off into town. Then the entire town, this thing stirred up everybody. The entire town came out to meet Jesus. Like, who is this? And these are probably not Jews because they're herding and raising pigs. Not kosher. Not kosher. So the entire town came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. The exact same word, the demons begged Jesus, send us into the pigs. They begged him to leave. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is battling the dark forces. See, when we get into this thing called spiritual warfare, I want you to think in this term. I just want you to understand what we're involved in as we read this story and get a deeper glimpse into who Jesus is, but who we are in all of this. Spiritual warfare is a restoration operation. A restoration operation. It's more than a rescue. See, you can rescue somebody from drowning, and they're the same person that they were before you rescued them. They might be eternally grateful. They might say things like, whatever you need, I'll do for you because you saved my life. And within a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, they're right back to the person they were. You all know that. You all have seen that. In whatever shape or form the rescue happened. No, spiritual warfare is a restoration operation. It restores the person because we have seen that over and over and over in Matthew so far. That when the leper was cleansed, he was restored to his family, his community to worship. Think of these men. Think of what they've been going through. We have no idea how long they've been like this. To put this in perspective, I have Colossians here just as one of those great verses. And it says, he delivered us from the power of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his Son he loves, in whom we have redemption and forgiveness of sins. See, all of that is what we call exile and return language. If you know your Bibles, when you read the word redemption, that word is a great word, meaning to be redeemed, to be set free, to be bought back. See, the children of Israel were redeemed, liberated from Egypt. When they were sent into exile in Babylon, they were redeemed. They were brought back to the land because they were forgiven. God had forgiven them, and they were brought back to the land. They were restored. They were restored because spiritual warfare is a restoration operation. So we come to this first part of this passage. If this is a restoration operation, and we're talking language of being exiled from who you were created to being restored or returned into that, this great narrative as we call it. Look at this passage, and we have to talk about the place of exile, the place, the location of where all this took place. Where do we do battle when we talk about spiritual warfare? In other words, where are we right now as a people? And you say, Pastor Mike, that's a huge question. Didn't you ever wonder why God said to Adam, "Where are you?" Was God just not very good at hide and seek? Did God not have a clue as to where Adam was hiding? See, our youngest son, JP, was never very good at hide and seek, because every time he would hide somewhere, he would just giggle because he couldn't wait to be found. So we always knew where he was. Adam and Eve, they were hiding because they were afraid. You all know that question, "Where are you?" is much deeper, is much more profound than just the physical place. If we're going to talk about spiritual warfare, we have to look at where the battle takes place. Where are we as people? Where are we as a church? Where are we as a community? Where are we as a society? Where is this battle taking place? If we just looked in the last passage of this storm, this fierce storm that attacked Jesus and the disciples, can you imagine the fierce storm that must be going on inside these two men? Jesus and the disciples are confronting another storm. Just look at this passage. When he says, when he came to the other side, to the region of the Gadareans, two demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were extremely violent, so that no one was able to pass by that way. And they cried out to Jesus, "Leave us alone, Son of God. Have you come here to torment us before our time?" This is where the battle took place, where these men were ostracized. These men were kept in a place that was unclean, where no Jew would go to. And obviously, nobody else would pass that way. "Lord, why are you bringing me to a place like this?" Because here were two men who were cut off, who were separated, that nobody wanted anything to do with them. And yet you would say, well, that was kind of smart, because they were obviously very violent. Why would God put us into a position like that? What I want you to see in all of this is where Jesus went. And if we're going to follow Jesus, we may be in those places where the battle is raging. Or we may be in those places where we think nothing's happening because we don't take the time to understand where we are at that moment. And what do I mean by that? Do we really understand just how far some people are from the Lord and who they were created to be and to be with? Do we really take the time to see that? Just where people are. Now you might say, well, this was easy to tell. These men were crazy. But see, where we are today, in America, in a very secular society, See, all of this is whitewashed over. All of this is made to look very nice and very shiny. We don't stop to think of what is really going on and where we are right now in this battle. And believe me, there is a battle going on, whether you see it or not. And there are people all around us who are very, very far from the Lord. Very far from the Lord. But this is where Jesus decided to go, and the disciples followed. Let me give you a crazy, and I'll use that word because you're going to think I'm crazy, an illustration of where we are right now as a culture. Whether it be in the church or outside of the church. Because sometimes, you all know, we can't even tell the difference anymore. When we have people who have struggled with relationships, we have people who struggle with jobs, when we have people who struggle with holiness, as much or more outside, in the church as outside. Where are we right now? Well, some of you have been taught that when you look at a glass and it's filled halfway, are you, a half-empty kind of person or a half-full kind of person? You've all heard that before. I always say to younger people, I can tell a lot about you whether you like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. And if you say I like both, I can tell something about you with that, because you're lying. And if you say I like neither, that tells me a lot too. But let me tell you, here is a commentary on where we are in a spiritual warfare. And it is Bud Light. What? Yeah, I said Bud Light. There's a group over here that's yelling it tastes great. And there's a group over here saying it's less filling. Are you a taste great or a less filling person? Are you taste great because all you want are the experiences? Taste and see that the Lord is good. And you jump from experience to experience to experience, and as soon as that experience fades away, you're out of here. But then you have the less filling people. Those people said, oh, here's the science, here's the chemistry, here's the makeup. This is how it's all supposed to work. I can have that and not feel bloated. And it all works that way. I've got all my ducks in a row. I come to church to get it all figured out. I want to know how pieces go together. I want the best practices, the science behind it all. Now, folks, this is a silly illustration. But it's true how we become this way. And the genius behind Bud Light, and this is our culture, is think about the genius behind it. Is that I would guess that beer is cheaper to produce, and, well, if it's light, I can drink more of it. Who in the world came up with that as a genius? Because it reflects who we are as a people. And I can tell a church and a person whether they are a taste great, less filling person based on our culture. We have got to understand this is where we are as a people. This is where the battle rages. This is where the place nobody wants to walk by, because we're too busy with the less filling side of things. We've got to have everything in the right place, in the right order, the best practices. We've got to do this. No, it's all about loving people, letting people know how much we appreciate them, letting them experience the love of the Lord. That's all it's about. And all we teach people with taste great Christianity is that when it doesn't taste great anymore, you move on. That is, to me, spiritual warfare. But he doesn't stop there. Not only is there a place, there's a time. There is a time for all of this. That time, where are we right now? Adam, where are you right now? See, the battle takes place in a time period for us right now. If you're sensitive to it, Jesus knew that. And here was this time period. A large herd of pigs was feeding some distance from them. Then the demons begged him, "If you drive us out, send us into the pigs." And he said, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep slope into the lake and drowned in the water. Now let me give you some insight here. The battle was right then and there, and those demons were destroyed. They didn't just drown the pigs. They were destroyed by Jesus. Because the demons knew that. You're judging us before the time, and Jesus is saying the time is now. And they were destroyed. Now, some of you, before you make a big deal about how could Jesus allow such waste and such recklessness, Jesus has authority. Jesus has authority in this world. See, the time is now, and we don't pretend to battle the dark forces in our own strength or power. It is in the power of the Spirit of Christ that we can do anything like this. But the time is now. We don't have any excuses that when we walk into a place and we understand what is going on and we just walk away, shame on us. See, spiritual warfare has a place and a time. And the Spirit of God will show you that. But you know what? With all of this, there's always fallout, right? Where does it leave us? Where does all of this leave us? See, after the battle takes place, what now? When we have dealt with someone because we know where they are, and God has spoken through us to them, pleading them to be restored to who they were created to be, an image bearer of Christ. People can reject all of that. They can, and they do, unfortunately. I always loved this blatant answer that seems to some people to just clear the battlefield, and it leaves you speechless. Because for us today in this battle, you always need to be prepared for this answer. I'm glad that works for you, but it's just not for me. How many times have you heard that one? Oh, they're being gracious now. You know, Michelle, I'm glad this Christianity works for you. That's just not for me. As if that completely neutralizes the battle. First of all, how do you know it doesn't work for you? Have you ever tried it? And heaven forbid if you tried it and you've run into opposition or a hard time as an American who can't stick to anything for more than 30 seconds. You know where the place is and you know where they are. Deal with it. Well, we know what happens in this. The town comes back. They all run back. They want to see what in the world's going on here. The herdsman ran off, went into the town, and told everyone what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the entire town came out to Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him, just like the demons begged. They begged him to leave their region. They were afraid. Now, what were they afraid of? I don't know. Were they afraid of Jesus? Maybe. Because of his great authority and power. Now, these are people, unlike where we are today, who make religion and the supernatural as an option. It's just one of many things on the buffet table of American culture. But in that day, they knew the world had powers. And for all I know, what they were afraid of is if Jesus stayed there, there would be a huge backlash of more demons and more attacks, and who knows what would be happening. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't want any more crazy things to happen, like losing a whole herd of pigs. What amazes me is that Matthew just kind of glosses right over the fact that there doesn't seem to be any emphasis on the fact that these two men were restored. These two men were restored. There was no celebrating. There was just fear. Think of the responses, and I fear the responses that when we share the gospel are more a reflection on our twisted American gospel than the true biblical gospel, because think of the responses that maybe you have heard, I have, and I'll go down just some of the ones that I have experienced when dealing with this spiritual warfare and the battle that goes on with people. When you start to get to the truth of where they are, if you're willing to do it right then and there, now. As I've heard things like, hey, anger, and I've seen things like that, outright anger. I remember talking to my younger brother who's walking with the Lord now, and he later told me, he said, Mike, I can't tell you how many times you were sharing the gospel with me, I wanted to punch you in the mouth. Or when I became a Christian, from the life that I lived before, and one of my best friends, who unfortunately could never get his life together, passed away last year. I can remember Greg telling all of our friends, when I became a Christian, this is what he said. He said, "Ho! Wentz has done one too many drugs this time. He's lost his mind." And then there's this disdain. or the response of superiority? I have to admit, that's the one that gets me, when someone acts so superior to your poor, pathetic crutch of a Christianity. You're so weak. But we have a lot of indifference and apathy too, right? Or we have people who are very content with their life. Very content. We have the skeptics. We have the procrastinators. And I could just go on and on and on. See, when you live in a religious marketplace filled with options, this is where our battlefield is. And there will always be all kinds of responses. So how do I bring this all together? For me, if spiritual warfare is a restoration operation, then it is from glory to glory. One of my all-time favorite verses is 2 Corinthians 3:18. This verse has moved me more than any other verse throughout the years. Is that when Paul says, and we, those who follow Christ, when we all with unveiled faces reflecting the glory of the Lord are being what? Transformed into the same image, that image of God, the image of Christ, from one degree of glory, the glory we experience now in his presence, to another, the glory we will experience. And he says this, from one degree of glory to another, which is from the Lord, who is the Spirit. We need to grab a hold and let people know. We need to let people know that what we believe in makes sense of what they're going through and who they are. I am a firm believer in becoming more and more a believer in the fact that Christianity makes the most sense of our existence. And all that we experience when seen in the light of restoration from glory to glory. That's what I want you to take away from this, is restoration is from glory to glory. Glory lost, glory regained, and glory fulfilled. We were created for glory. That's the great story of the Bible. God's faithfulness to take us from glory to glory, to be glorious. So my challenge to you in closing, this is what I want you to practice this week in formation to Christ-likeness. If the Bible is this great narrative that grips us, then when you read the Scriptures, and I pray you're reading the Scriptures often, if not daily, is that you put yourself in the story. Find a place or several places in the story. Think of the narrative we just read. Put yourself in the place of the disciples. What were they seeing? What were they smelling? What were they hearing? Put yourself in the place of the demon-possessed men. You know they had to have some knowledge going on with the demons possessing them. They were exiled. Think of the herdsmen. Think of the townspeople that came back. What would you have felt like if you heard this story and came running back to see what happened? Put yourself in the story, because you know what? We're in the story. The story is from glory to glory. That's what God's doing in you. Read that passage again. From one degree of glory to another, from glory to glory. You are there. That's where we are. We have the opportunity to be a part in restoring people to who they were created to be. Who they were created to be. I want to make available, before I pray here, annual readings of the Psalms. This will take you through the Psalms twice every year. The Psalms are probably the most quoted in the New Testament, so it obviously meant a lot to the Jews. It was part of who they were. I have a few copies, and if they're all gone, we'll print some more. But annual reading of the Psalms. I want you to read the scriptures daily, and this is a great way to start. Great way to start. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you have restored us, and this restoration is an ongoing job, an ongoing experience. Lord, may we have hearts that go out to other people who desperately need to be restored, just like these two men who were cut off from their families and their friends and their community and their ability to worship you. Lord, may we be a part of this restoration operation in your grace and your power and your spirit. We thank you, Lord Jesus, for you truly are the Son of God, the King of Israel, the Lord of lords, the King of kings, the one in whom we find strength and mercy and love. Amen.